Okay, good morning to my colleagues and students at Binghamton University here in the US, and good evening to our colleagues at VIT and Vellore, India, and other campuses as well. My name is Mohammed Kasaune. I am a professor and department chair of system science and industrial engineering at Binghamton University in the Thomas J. Watson College of Engineering and Applied Science. And I'm very delighted to welcome all of you to this joint webinar series between Binghamton University and VIT to cover a wide range of topics in various areas related to advanced manufacturing, flexible electronics, material science and engineering, solar cells and additive manufacturing, and many more. In this webinar series, we have invited a list of distinguished speakers from both Binghamton University and VIT to present on various topics. This will be a weekly webinar series that will involve speakers from both institutions, alternating every week this fall semester and in the spring as well, with the exception of holidays. And this session will be recorded, and we will make the recordings available to all the participants. In a few minutes, we're going to post a registration link in the chat box. So we'd like to request you to please fill out your information so that we can send you the recorded presentation after the seminar is over. And we will also use this information to invite you to the next presentations and keep you posted about the schedule. At this point, I would like to invite Dean Krishnaswamy Srihari and Distinguished Professor of SUNY to say a few words and welcome our guests. Dean Srihari.
To our colleagues at Vellore, good evening. And of course, to our colleagues here in Binghamton, New York, from SUNY here, from Binghamton University, good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be here today at the inauguration of this long series of lectures from both sides, from VIT and Binghamton. This is yet another step in our long-standing collaboration between our two campuses that is now into 11 plus years. And this marks a new chapter. And as Dr. Brijesh Nair was saying earlier, we have got similar seminars in computer science and with the School of Business. And we're also looking to do something similar with mathematics. So thank you very much. I am delighted that Dean Vasudevan and his colleagues are here today and wholeheartedly supporting this initiative. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you very much, Dean Vasudevan, and to all our colleagues, thank you.
Dean Srihari, thank you very much for your remarks. I'd now like to introduce Dean Vasudevan from VIT. He and I have been working collaboratively to co-organize this joint webinar series. Over the last few weeks, I had the great pleasure to work with him to put the schedule together, and of course had the great pleasure to meet with him here in Binghamton and also at the VIT campus in Vellore. Dean Vasudevan, thank you again for your time and effort, and I would like to invite you to please say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mohammed. Good morning to colleagues at Binghamton, and good evening to my colleagues at VIT. I'd like to thank Professor Srihari and Professor Mohammed and Dr. Brijesh Nair for their great effort on making this webinar happen. It is really a really great day to School of Mechanical Engineering at VIT. This is going to provide a strong platform to various collaborative works. And I'd like to thank all our colleagues at Binghamton for their great effort and providing sharing their knowledge and platform for the collaborative works. And I will also like to thank Professor Poliks for delivering the webinar talk. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Vasudevan and Dr. Brijesh, for your help in coordinating the seminar and making it available to your faculty and students and colleagues from all over VIT. Thank you again. At this point, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Mark Poliks, to present the inauguration seminar as part of this joint webinar series. Many of you have received the abstract and the bio, but I'd like to say just a few words about Dr. Poliks. Dr. Poliks is an Empire Innovation Professor of Engineering, a Professor of System Science and Industrial Engineering in our department, and also a Professor of Material Science and Engineering and Director of the Center for Advanced Microelectronics Manufacturing, CAM, which is a New York State Center of Advanced Technology at the State University of New York. In addition to his many roles at Binghamton University, he serves as the chair of the Smart Energy Transdisciplinary Area of Excellence at the Binghamton campus. In 2006, he was very instrumental in the establishment of the Research Center CAM to explore the application of roll-to-roll processing methods to flexible electronics and displays with equipment funding from the United States Display Consortium and the Army Research Lab. His primary area of research is in industry-relevant topics that include high-performance electronics packaging, flexible hybrid electronics, medical and instrumental industrial sensors, printed RF components, materials processing, aerosol, jet printing, roll-to-roll manufacturing, inline quality, and control of reliability in electronics. And at this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Poliks to give his seminar on flexible hybrid electronics. Dr. Poliks, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kastani, and thanks to all who've organized this wonderful event. Certainly, we'd love to be together, and I guess we're all adapting to the ways of the time so that we can learn that we always have a quick portal of communication, and it will be always effective, and we'll always be here to engage in this way. And then once this is lifted, we'll be much further along in our relationships and finding how we move forward in joint collaborations, perhaps on topics such as this. So I'm delighted to speak on my area of research and the work that I've been doing here at Binghamton. The work represents that of a center of excellence, which we have, which consists of 6 different centers. I know some of you may be familiar, others this is new, so a few introductory words on this. This organization is overall led by Professor Samakia, who's our director and vice president for research, as well as a SUNY distinguished professor. This organization has expertise in the area of electronic packaging reliability, heterogeneous integration, of course, flexible electronics you'll hear today, energy smart electronic systems, advanced solar, and advanced batteries. And of course, we're certainly honored that our battery effort here on campus is led by Nobel laureate and distinguished professor Stan Whittingham, a longtime colleague here on campus. If you were here, and some of you have come, you would see our new research campus consisting of the Smart Energy Building, where chemistry and physics is housed, the Center of Excellence, which is kind of a hub for research activities and has a couple of my labs, our biotechnology building, home to our medical engineering department, and our engineering science building, home to electrical computer engineering, as well as mechanical, and the material science engineering program in part, and of course, Dean Trahari's office. This is just this new part of our campus, and we're deeply proud of it and the wonderful facilities that it brings to all those who work with us and all of our students here. And so we look forward to welcoming you in as time permits. The Center of Advanced Microelectronics Manufacturing, as pointed out, was first established in 2005. And we've been a long part of the succession since the United States Display Consortium, the Nanobio Manufacturing Consortium, and now the NextFlex Manufacturing USA. This has brought us a steady stream of funding and equipment and opportunities to work not only with our colleagues on campus, but companies across New York State, as well as across the US and the world. And it's been a wonderful experience for us. And the areas that I focus on have ranged from, and still do, thin glass and ceramic packaging work we do with Corning Incorporated, the fabrication of thin film devices on plastic and glass, transparent antennas, an effort we initially started with Corning and has since become one of our areas of competence, and then RF electronics. And then the topics we'll be discussing today. And so comprehensive efforts going on here throughout our Center of Excellence and each of the individual labs. I'd like to get started and tell you a little about NextFlex Manufacturing USA, which is this national consortium. In some sense, it kind of mimics Fraunhofer Institute here in the US, and there are others as well. A little about our work on aerosol jet printing, which has been substantial. Some work on wearable electronics, flexible hybrid electronics in general, mechanical and reliability testing, and your awareness on an effort on the IEEE Electronic Packaging Society Heterogeneous Integration Roadmap, of which I'm leading on the Wearable chapter. Manufacturing USA is a Department of Defense funded effort to bring manufacturing back and development from the bench into the production lines of companies here in the US. And we're certainly privileged that New York State has several, AIM being our sister institution in Rochester, which focuses on integrated photonics, as well as others. The NextFlex central office is located in San Jose, but we're very proud that we've been named the New York Node due to our commitments, not only from our state, but also our university and all the companies that we work with here in the US. As pointed out here, the NextFlex Institutes or the Manufacturing USA Institute's intent is to bridge the gap, to take early concepts that have been developed on the bench and do additional research to get them to the point where they're ready for adoption by the private sector. And with this comes many of our university partners and many, many companies throughout the spectrum, of material suppliers to large-scale integrators such as Boeing and Lockheed, and equipment makers and all those. So it's a great opportunity to be involved in such a community. And like I said, you know, we're delighted that we're home to the New York node of NextFlex. So first of all, what is flexible hybrid electronics? And we're all probably familiar with electronic packaging and the fact that us here at Binghamton, as well as our colleagues at Georgia Tech and Auburn for that matter, have a long history in working in this area. But flexible hybrid electronics takes electronics to the unpackaged dimension. When we think of electronics, we think of them in a box, probably sealed with encapsulating materials to protect them from the elements. And these boxes are typically rigid and, you know, are made as thin as they can, like our mobile phones, to be portable, but you know, do not really allow a full spectrum of possibilities of application. And so what flexible hybrid electronics does is take the best of the printed electronics, and those could be printed sensors and devices as well, but typically printed interconnects and printed circuits. It mounts a typically unpackaged die directly to the surface, taking great care to recall that dies are rigid and the ceramics and plastics we're working with are flexible, so that they have to be thin so that they will conform and that the interconnects will be robust. And ultimately create, as you see here, an early prototype of an all FHE Arduino controller to be something that is much more consistent with what could be laminated into an article of clothing or a wearable device that would allow communications, data acquisition, and all these kinds of things centraled in one generic platform, and ultimately something that could be manufactured in high volume like Arduino controllers are today. Morphing that with wearables, it's interesting to point out that wearables have a bit of history themselves. And it was the earliest days in 1788 that Thomas Jefferson introduced the first pedometer of a wearable sorts. It's probably made of wood. And then in the 20s, a galvanic skin response system with the attempt to measure pulse rate and even blood pressure early then. Early hearing aids, and of course we know that hearing aids have been an area where packaging and integration has been all resulting in tremendous reduction in size. But it wasn't really until the 2000 when the Bluetooth communication protocols were established, and it was now possible for these small devices to communicate to a larger device, such as a cell phone or computer, where things like fitness trackers and lifeline devices for medical or for home care, ingestible sensors for monitoring the inside of the body, drug delivery systems, and of course, the Apple Watch, which I wear, and I know has helped me to exercise better during our period of pandemic isolation. And so really where this all points, as this market study had indicated, it's really devices, especially medical, and for that matter, industrial as well, need to be more conformable. Hence, clear opportunity for flexible hybrid electronics. We've been involved in these types of things even before FHE was conceived. Early in 2010, CAM, together with Endicott Interconnect, a outcome of the IBM and Endicott and Universal Instruments, worked together using facilities in the CAM to deliver a ultra stealthy and still state-of-the-art package to today of an intravascular ultrasound catheter system. This consisted of already thinned dye, ASIC dye that were programmable, and mounted on a very thin substrate of 12.5 microns with equally small wiring. And I must say they were mounted with traditional solder type bumps consisting of lead type solders. When placed on these devices, and then along with a transducer which is singulated into pixels, it can be wound to a diameter of 1 millimeter and about 7 millimeters long. This device at that time was undergoing trials in Asia, and to today it's now manufactured and currently manufactured in Europe by a major medical supply house. And this device basically emits ultrasound signals while within the arteries and relays them back to a bedside unit, measures their echo and their echo dwell times, and uses that to determine areas of buildup, whether they be fatty or mineral based, allowing physicians to have a better path toward intervention and therapeutic approaches. And so, as I pointed out, this still today is a state-of-the-art device. Things like this are not made that often. This one in the case is flexible. It's rolled once and used once, so it offers some reliability advantage in that sense. But who could imagine that you would have so much electronics in such a very small space that travels deep inside the body into our most critical organ? So that is something that we're very proud of, and something that was really important in stimulating our government here to know and to remember that packaging and the way you integrate chips and place them together is key and important to advancing any electronics technology. And it's now today packaging that's really leading performance in our electronic system. Another device I'd like to point out to you, we did a deconstruction on. This was part of a small company from Professor John Rogers' group called MC10. When fully encapsulated, it's a very nice patch in a polydimethylsiloxane case. It's called the biostamp. But when you remove that and dissolve it away, you'll see some very interesting packaging. A little more standard in the sense that there are little circuit islands which have traditional components mounted. When you look at it more carefully, though, you'll see that it's really a 4-layer flexible circuit where these chips are attached to. and they are then stiffened in a very prudent manner to protect the interconnects from damage to these little cards. And then all of the unnecessary flexible connectors have been cut away with a laser to create something that is clearly something you can stretch or compress or twist or turn, and making it something that can be applied to the body and then peeled off and reused as the intention was. And of course, you can see batteries are a key area of these technologies. This particular device, the catheter is so small because it's powered by the catheter leads coming from a bedside unit, no batteries required. However, wearable devices are always facing how they will be powered. And if a battery is needed, the batteries are still taking quite a bit of space. And these types of technologies continue to develop. Recent news in IEEE Spectrum show what would be a sleep apnea monitoring system for the future, rather than having to go to a clinic and get wired up for a night's of poor sleep while being monitored. Some of these techniques might actually happen at your home. I know I've had a call with a physical therapist from New York wondering how he could use telemedicine to better aid patients in physical therapy. Well, the use of the right kind of wearable patches that monitor motion, coupled with Bluetooth communications to the internet, to the physical therapist, could be a way that a patient could be coached in how to do their exercises in a more consistent and effective means. And so these are all things that are coming up, and some of these things we're pointing out as we develop the roadmap. But clearly, the marketing survey and the direction is leading to new conformalities in flexible electronics, stretchable, transparent if needed, semi-breathable so that you don't perspire underneath them, a variety of chemical and electrical sensors, and RF, not only RF used for communication, but RF used for power. The work of Professor Rogers now at Northwestern has shown the use of near field type powered devices, such as those made by Texas Instruments, could mean that you can use antennas to activate and power them, and then at the same time use them to send information and receive, eliminating the need for a battery. Ultimately, the paradigm that we pursue as part of NextFlex projects is looking, and actually this I should have, and if Begad happens to watch, this is a similar kind of a diagram we drew when we considered how to found S3IP, the Center of Excellence. I remember it kind of looked like a little scorpion, electronics with both rigid and flex built in. And this is in some sense very similar. We have a substrate that's carrying our components. Most are thin and unpackaged. We have a variety of printed and antennas or batteries. And we have microcontrollers and passive devices. We have vias also printed through that have sensors or fluid absorption or collection systems on the other side. We have biocompatible adhesives and the ability to integrate with textiles, all in this simple type of device. And these are many of the applications that you'll see in today's talk and the kind of paradigm that we are working toward. In the New York Node, if you come to visit our facilities, you'll see that we have lots of great equipment, whether it's in our roll-to-roll lab, in our sister organization, the IEEE, with their assembly line, and various placement equipment, and at the CAM with a variety of mechanical, electrical testing, as well as a vast array of printing equipment. And this has led us to be successful in numbers of projects with our New York State partners and other universities, and ultimately leading us to get a designation from New York State as a center of advanced technology with a focus of medical and industrial sensors. And some of these devices I will explain in our talk today. To get started, I'd like to tell you a little about work in aerosol jet printing. It might be a technique you're not as familiar with. We have published extensively in this area, understanding the physics of the technique and how to make it more consistent and more reliable for use. Aerosol jet printing is great for printing on flexible and rigid parts. But and we use it a lot, but one aspect of it that we can also use is to print on complex surfaces. And I've removed the videos from this particular presentation for sake of size, but we have two of these systems. One allows us to print with 3 axes in X, Y, and Z. And what we're allowed to print are droplets that can be as small as 10 microns, allowing us to print very small features. These systems have a laser built in to allow us to sinter these metal inks, and as well as cure them if they in fact have UV components. In addition, we have like a little shower head where we can dispense gas to the near point where the printing is happening, in particular reducing gas, allowing us to turn copper inks into better copper metals in situ as and after printed, allowing them to have a much higher conductivity. And we can do all that and more with our other system, which allows us to operate with 5 axes. Shown here, if the video were playing, you would see actually the motion in X, Y, and Z, theta, and phi of this cell phone case, and show that an F-shaped antenna is being printed on the curved surface of that. And of course, this can be taken to the extreme. Shown here is a little video of the basic technique of aerosol jet printing. Basically, we are creating an aerosol of an ink, which can have a fairly wide viscosity ranges. It gets sent through a pathway and then focused into a material beam using sheath gaffs to basically make a targeted material beam that is in fact used for printing. And you can see here the kind of printing that we can obtain. And with the 5-axis capability, this allows us not only to print on surfaces, and shown here, we're printing a RF antenna array on a UAV, an unmanned vehicle used for field monitoring. And you can see literally the idea is, rather than have bulky circuit boards in these systems, maybe much of the electronics can be printed on or within the device, so that these same structural members that give the aircraft its durability can also have dual support and support the interconnects and various components, in this case antennas, solar cells, or for that matter batteries, all on the surfaces or within interior surfaces. And that also means we can print devices and antennas on complex shapes, whether here shown a cone or a Bernoulli type double spiral tooth type geometry, or highly irregular surfaces. In a project with General Electric, we were chartered to try to print these inductor coils onto surfaces that were not even sinusoidal in their behavior. And so a very interesting opportunity of printing electronics on surfaces themselves that may have already been shaped to be conformal to some other kind of device. To the next topic, we look at manufacturing, platform development, activities for future healthcare. And we think of healthcare we know today, and when patients are in a healthcare and clinical setting, obviously there's need for monitoring, and there's need for monitoring at the critical level, and maybe in the general level, and then maybe as they go home, the ability to continue monitoring. So this hospital to home continuum is something that is certainly enabled by wireless monitoring, by Bluetooth as pointed out, or more advanced devices even that through flexible hybrid electronics can be integrated onto wearable patches. And it's been the point of projects we've been working on in this topic to get to that. And for that matter, to even help in the current situation we're currently in, where perhaps more and more people need to be monitored for the onset of infection. And we'll look at a few of those scenarios by the end of the talk. In this project, we were privileged to be able to look at the whole set of needs and requirements to perform research and development, allowing us to build structure. So whether it was the environment that it needed to withstand, the various mechanical the types of measurements that would need to be made, the types of interconnects we need to do, the types of processing, the types of test vehicles, and the types of target applications. We had a really privileged opportunity to work in a very broad way. And we came up with a prototype device, which actually has led to additional devices and funding as well. Literally initially a stretchable piece of polyimide, which had some polyimide removed in the shape of S connectors. Looking at new ways to apply thin devices, some unpackaged, to these surfaces, and then new ways to integrate flexible and stretchable and all printed sensors onto them, and literally devices that could be stretched to fit for a patient or an object of different sizes. And we worked on several prototypes of this, and then we've taken it in to yet another dimension. In this case, this was a focus where we got to work with printing, both printing that we did in our facilities and printing that we did in roll-to-roll facilities, such as those available here in the US at a company called TapeCon, and at an institute in Finland called VTT, where they specialize in printing. And here, not only printing resistive traces, but ultimately the types of sensor devices that would be stretched to fit for the person or patient or object, and to determine how well they behaved in terms of their electrical conductivity, their reliability, and other issues, such as if they come in contact with clothing, will it result in noise and static, and such as so-called the Triboelectric effect. All these things needed to come into play. And this led to, again, additional projects and additional follow-up where we could really be successful now in looking at this continuum of care with a device that, if it needed, could be much larger. Those of you who work in medical sensing know that, especially for ECG, better signals are obtained if, in fact, the sensors are further apart. In addition, other sensors can be added, such as pulse oximetry, and for that matter, fluid sampling, to create a fully integrated wearable device. And this was a device that many parts of it we were able to perform the research and development activities here on our campus in support of our colleagues at GE. Involving screen printing, and then involving lamination, because ultimately we needed to make a multi-layer structure for our cable that resisted the triboelectric effects causing static and noise. And so this had to be a multi-set of materials and multiple inks, things that had to be laminated together, and of course tested to show that they would in fact work, leading to our ability to have this truly multi-point type analysis of respiration, core body temperature, reflective SpO2, oxygen sensing, and a 3-lead ECG, all in one device. And so additional tests that we performed involved this triboelectric test, and you can see the triboelectric effect here shown very clearly in this ECG pattern, which has been noised by the presence of movement of a hospital gown or an article of clothing, and with proper circuitry and proper isolation. In our printed coax, we were able, in fact, to eliminate this noise. In addition, if the patient were needed to be defibrillated, this is also a test that we can perform. This is a device that we have here. It literally applies the high voltage, 5 kilovolts, to this printed structure. And of course, it's supposed to withstand. And so any small defects in printing or contamination, of course, can cause it to burn up. And you don't want that to happen on a patient. And for that matter, the device, the point of the test is not that it tests for not burning up, but the test that, in fact, the device will still work before and after such a defibrillating event. So a kind of a new tool for our reliability test kit. RF communications are essential in any kind of printed wearable type system. and the ability to print RF components rather than to place them, as has typically been done, is certainly something that will be key to the future in reducing size and potentially reducing power requirements. And so we had a great opportunity to work with industrial partners on developing a test system where we could basically test all these different kinds of components. We, of course, compared them to plated versions, and then some we had hybrid printed and plated, and some were all printed. But things like capacitors and resistors and Wilkinson dividers and spiral inductors and ring resonators and filters and coplanar waveguides and all these kinds of things were tested after fabrication, and now we have capability in our lab to go up to 40 gigahertz. And the Air Force was very interested in this and awarded us an additional project to look at actually a better approach, sort of the PDK type approach often used in the semiconductor industry of having a good design and having good models and having good data on fabrication and test, so that we are now better equipped to design a device which will perform to specification and that is robust to all the types of abnormalities that can exist in the various printed approaches. And you can imagine, when you're making something in a silicon fab or in a clean room and using the standard vacuum deposition, plating, and etching and photolithography, you can be quite precise. And unfortunately, the printing methods are not as precise. So really the basis here was to make a more robust designs so that more predictable behavior of RF devices in particular could be generated. And this came up with a variety of things that we fabricated, working together with our colleagues, understanding the data, logging the various process parameters, and literally creating a database, which ultimately you need from a PDK type approach, and then ultimately generating large data sets for a variety of devices. And shown here is an RF filter, and you would think that this would not be possible with simply printing some traces on a piece of plastic. And the fact is, it's true. And in this case, it works quite well, showing a clear pass at around 10 gigahertz, consistent with a simulation, and very reasonable performance. Really an indication that printed RF components will be an enabling factor in wearable devices in the years to come. So it won't just be the active and interconnect circuits. It's going to be the active RF circuits as well. A very important activity that we're involved with NextFlex is a controller. And as we pointed out, the Arduino controllers are these days ubiquitous, and the ability to make and have them widely available in a flex hybrid format will certainly propel the industry in adoption for wearable systems of all kinds, for person and machine, to allow them to be monitored, controlled, and communicate. And so the ability to look at the approach and, in some sense similar to a PCB approach, but because of the way things are done with a purely additive deposition of the circuits, significantly reduced numbers of steps result in this approach. And as a result, looking from the system design through the layout, the print, the bonding of the die, surface mount assembly, encapsulation, and then final test, ultimately leading to a device as shown in the early picture, which is no longer on a bulky circuit board, but now is on a flexible substrate, and one that's in fact ready for integration into wearable types of devices. And so this is an ongoing area of research, understanding these interfaces, how to make them robust and durable to the motions of not only the handling during manufacturing, but of course their use, and to make all those interconnects reliable so that use is predictable and can be counted upon, is certainly a key objective here. And so work in our lab as well has involved mechanical and electrical reliability of these printed components. Much of this work I do in collaboration with Professor Borgeson, who you will hear later in this seminar series. And in some sense, I've made Peter, for those who know him a little well, I've made him a bit more flexible than he used to be in terms of his ability to work with softer materials. And we've developed together a lab that allows us to do this in a remarkable set of ways. And so the use of fatigue cycling, especially in articles that are stretchable, and for that matter, circuits or printed traces that are stretchable, and the ability to understand how many cycles they can withstand of either tension or bending type fatigue is key to their behavior. Shown here is one of our new variable temperature MTS test units. And before I get into specific printed traces, I'll show our versatility in actually assessing these devices in situ. Shown here, mounted in the MTS system is a Garmin chest strap. These are the pads that would normally be on the chest. On the back side is a device which has Bluetooth capability to be connected to a watch. So as you exercise, you wear the chest strap and it's communicating with the watch, which is a little more bulky and has a little more space for processing and storage and communication. But the question is, you know, how long can the printed features within inside this chest strap actually survive? And so you could think, well, we'll just test it a few times and see if it still works. Well, isn't it even better if we can feed the chest strap while in the Instron from an ECG generator, a simulated or archived human health ECG signal, and that gets input directly in, and then we undergo thousands or 10,000s of cyclic strains, and during which we're feeding this information back to the watch and then to a PC, where we can in fact see, was the pulse rate still being reproduced in a consistent way, or has the device started to degrade? And ultimately, this is the best way to test systems like this, is literally with an in situ test, an in situ functional test during the actual deformations. Now, of course, we've done this for many more basic and fundamental cases. In this case, looking at nano silver printed traces on a test vehicle, which we undergo mild strains repetitively while monitoring using 4-point probe their resistances. And you can see for a first loading cycle and then an unloading cycle, we develop a hysteresis and a lag due to the viscoelastic effect of the polymer substrate itself, and if there are any in an ink, which wasn't in this case, some there as well, and do this over many, many cycles and understand the evolution of how the relative resistance changes during this deformation process. Ultimately, as you can agree, you're not going to use anything printed if the resistance is going to change dramatically during the time of use. And so understanding the mechanism of what happens and how it happens, and to what extent can design parameters be established, is very, very key. And we've not only done that in tension mode, but also in bending mode. This is a geometry we like very much because you can imagine if it has attached die on it, we can start to actually strain the interconnects for those surfaces and interfaces as well, allowing us to get a very comprehensive set of information. Of course, we have many theses worth of information on these topics. Just pointing out one, and both good and bad news in some sense, looking at these conductive traces made with this nano silver ink, we show fatigue as we would expect after numbers of cycles, but after that we anneal it, and thinking that baking will make things better. And it truly does. Annealing does help, and that consistently after even a few hundred cycles, we will start again at the same low resistance. But what we learn through this process of this subtle cyclic fatigue is that, of course, we are causing damage. And damage is accumulating because after the first anneal, yes, we start at the same low resistance at the beginning, but after 100 cycles, we certainly have a higher resistance. And after the next anneal, we do even start at the same point, but we're at even a much higher resistance. Now, keep in mind, we're talking, relative resistance in single ohms here. So it may be still good enough for many designs, which are quite tolerant. But keep in mind that bending of any nanosilver ink formulation is in fact doing damage. It's causing cracks to the individual interfaces between the particles. And some can be annealed as the substrate and the viscoelastic properties recover. But damage done is damage and will in fact impact the resistance over the long term. And so it's good news that we healed, but not quite as good as new for the future. And so a good point to keep in mind as we design for these application spaces. Now, we've talked a lot about the electrical circuitry. We've also looked at, in fact, the microfluidic type approaches in the case of looking at sweat and hydration. As you know, hydration is extremely important for human health, for us sitting here today and listening, and for those who are patients and maybe not drinking enough water, and for those that are athletes or those that are in a demanding environment. Being hydrated and having the proper ionic constitution is extremely important for your performance. And so we again, had a great opportunity to work together with our students and our industrial partners on the evolution of a sweat sensing device. And you can see initially we were using a component we purchased for the electronics, and then we've since developed a new one. And I'll show you a little more about that. But in today's talk, I really want to focus on the wearable patch itself. And this initially started with a wicking material that absorbed the perspiration and passed it by a selective ion sensor measuring either potassium or sodium. We had an improved version, which had a little softer cover to the hard electronics. And then in the most recent iteration, we tested last year a device that can test both sodium and potassium at the same time, as well as measure the sweat rate. And so how did we do that? Well, we did that through an evolution of R&D activities where we understood better how our system worked in its initial stages. We did actual field tests at the Air Force Academy using cadets as part of their capstone project, and we got 2 chances to do that in 2 successive years. In the first year, we learned, because of a number of factors, that we needed to do something different, including move the electronics and have a better adhesive. And we also learned that we didn't want to carry 2 of these around to monitor either sodium or potassium, and that we needed to have a dual sensor. And so we learned all of that and came up with this new device. And work done in our lab, together with our colleagues at GE, came up with this dissolvable carbon resistors, which allow the sweat to, in fact, be measured in terms of how much you do sweat. And so the rate of sweat, or rate of perspiration, of course, is a key metric. And so the material gets wicked in and then dissolves a series of resistors, and the overall resistance changes. And the change in resistance is what you measure as an effect of the sweat rate itself. And so this was a key material choice and technology that allowed a parameter that was previously unmeasured to be measurable. In fact, these were not only tested initially in the field at the Air Force Academy, as I'll show you on the next slide, they were also tested at the Corey Stringer Institute at University of Connecticut, where in that particular institute, they study heat stroke. And heat stroke is, of course, a deadly effect of not having adequate hydration. And unfortunately, heat stroke is not only happening in professional athletes and in service personnel. Heat stroke in this country is happening in child athletes in high school and in junior high because they're not properly hydrated and being worked too hard by their coach. And so a very, very important area of research. So showing a little detail of our sweat patch system, basically there was a valve which allowed the sweat to be introduced, our sensor, our various wicks and pads, and that the sweat would follow, and then the backing and adhesives where we could attach the electronics. We chose to put the electronics in a standalone device decoupled with a set of leads. When in fact the all flexible Arduino type systems are available, then of course this could simply be laminated onto the backside, but that's still work in progress. The system also has a battery in it, and it also has a memory card to store data locally. What's most important is the microfluidic system itself. We started with a standard inexpensive PET substrate. We patterned electrodes with silver using screen printing. We developed, together with our colleagues in industry, the correct kind of a cocktail sensitive to either potassium or sodium electrodes, and together have a standard electrode in the middle. All this is kind of mimicking what you would tend to buy in things that would look more like pH meter type electrodes, can now be reduced in something that can be mass produced and printed relatively quickly with a variety of materials, and then made in a roll-to-roll format, so it could be really low cost. And you can see this entire dual potassium sodium sensor is about the size of a dime. And what does it make use of? It makes use of this wicking pad where the sweat comes in and follows these surfaces and allows the potential differences to be measured between these electrodes, allowing us to demonstrate we not only have selectivity between sodium and potassium, but we also have adequate sensitivity as well. And the work that we were doing in the field, not only at the Air Force Academy, but also with the Corey Stringer Institute, showed in fact we also have durability. And so shown here is a picture. This is our colleague Andrew Burns, who initially did the tests on a run, which you can see charted by his mobile device, showing it gets pretty icky looking after a nice run, but nevertheless showing how these dissolvable resistors are in fact working. Shown here is the work we did last year at the Air Force Academy, and we again learned something, that in this case it wasn't the backpack that was in the way, it was the fact that they were going to do calisthenics first, and they thrust their back into the ground to get ready for their long day workout where they would test the device, but little did we know they were thrusting our device into the dirt, of course, covered by their clothing. Nevertheless, we passed and it worked. It was durable enough to withstand the calisthenics associated with that preparative activity. And so, with the human health and performance, we've been looking at the vital signs, we've been looking at the sweat patch, and not discussed today is really the next step is to look at interstitial fluid sampling by the use of microneedles. The idea that we could create an array of these that could be in fact inserted over time, where we could measure maybe the onset of infection or onset of response isn't happening at the moment, but maybe it's going to happen in an hour or 2 or 3 or a day. And so much like an allergy type test where microneedles are inserted and an inflammatory response is visually detected after peeling it off, in this case, we actually collect fluid, have electrochemical sensors that can tell us, in fact, is the infection or is a response occurring at a certain period of time. So just think how important that is for things we face today, or for that matter here in New York with Lyme disease, and how difficult it is to detect when in fact is the onset of infection. And so this represents an opportunity for another device for our wearable patch system to collect more data and to collect data from within and just under the skin without drawing blood. Very important approach. And so to kind of wrap up today's talk, I'm sorry if I've gone over a bit. Just concluding, the types of materials we've discussed, printable inks and fabrication methods are providing significant opportunities, not only for R&D, but for near-term manufacturing opportunities for new disposable medical and industrially related device. And I always use the term industrial because you can develop a technology for a person to wear and simply often a change of materials and change of sensors and maybe the same kind of approach and the same kind of electronics, and you can put it on a wing of a helicopter, or you can put it on a wing of a blade of a windmill and monitor strain and determine is in fact the thing about to crack. And that's a big problem with windmill blades. In fact, we're doing something like that using a totally wireless system. This is a project on joint with Georgia Tech, where we can literally aim an RF signal at a device at a distant patch that's embedded in a blade and receive back a signal that tells us what the current strains are. I'll save that for a future talk. We've also shown you a multi-layer, and that's not just a traditional multi-layer printed circuits, but now we're talking about multi-layer materials that in this case could transport and, for that matter, analyze biological fluids. And so the ability to transport fluids and analyze and sense them and integrate it into a patch is key. And also, for that matter, the lamination onto clothing so that it becomes part of the garment, or onto the person, or onto the object is key. Flexible hybrid electronics using thin unpackaged die and the best of printed electronics will create ultimately low cost and high performance devices. Ultimately, it's getting that die onto the surface. And it's really the revelation that we had here in the US and acknowledged by our government that it's all about the packaging. And you can print all the best printed transistors you'd like. You're never going to get to what a silicon fab can make in terms of density and performance. And so why not? Why not use the die themselves? And why not just thin them and make their connections robust to the particular application? A theme that I think we've demonstrated in this talk. Printed RF components and to enable wireless communication, or for that matter, the power. And when applicable, and not always applicable, making use of RF sources to actually power the devices so that no batteries are required. Understanding the mechanical and electrical reliabilities show both promise and challenge. And certainly there are emerging best practices that can be adopted, limiting strain, limiting thickness, improving compliance by reducing modulus of various connectors will certainly be key to that. And I demonstrated to you today at the beginning that we can not only do this on a patch, but we can do this kind of integration on a complicated surface using multi-axis aerosol jet printing or other kinds of multi-axis printing tools, such as those available from a company called Nscript, will ultimately lead to putting electronics on complex surfaces themselves, whether they are rigid or flexible. And last, much of our community is linked worldwide by the efforts of the IEEE and the Electronic Packaging Society on their heterogeneous integration roadmap activities. This allows us to communicate free thought and pre-competitive ideas and knowledge of people who work in academics and research institutes and industry to sort of to chart the path to the future for, in our case, for our chapter, for the medical and wearable device applications. Of course, I'd like to thank all those that sponsor us, and ultimately it benefits our students who get to work in the lab with amazing equipment and materials, state-of-the-art projects, closely with both government and company mentorship, leading to very, very relevant activities. And so with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm certainly honored to kick off this seminar series with BIT. Thank you.
Dr. Poliks, thank you very much for this great presentation. This was indeed a great topic to kick off our joint webinar series with our colleagues at VIT. I personally enjoyed hearing about the breadth and depth of your exciting research and all the work that your colleagues and students and partners are doing. It's definitely cutting edge, and it is our hope that we will be able to collaborate with our colleagues at VIT, and hopefully they will get to come and visit us to get to participate in some of the research activities. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or feel free to type the question in the chat box, and Dr. Poliks will be glad to address the questions.
Sure.
Sure. This is Professor K. Padmanabhan from VIT. It was an honor to listen to you. And then I was pretty impressed, particularly about the punishing reliability test that you did. And I just need to know a bit more about how punishing were you on the reliability tests on wearable electronics, because on flexible materials, when you do, especially when they are viscoelastic and then prone to moisture absorption and then hygrothermal effects too, leading to changes in conductivity and all that because of water absorption, other kinds of refuse that the people may put it to. So like I was pretty impressed with the fatigue tests and then the other punishing reliability tests that you did. And I want to know, what were your considerations when you considered warranty period of such wearable electronic devices? What was the warranty period? And then when you worked with industries, what were your considerations to fill the gap between the governmental and the private, product reliability related efforts? Or what were your thoughts, and then how did you meet the outcomes, expected outcomes?
Very important question on a very important topic. Certainly, the area of standards, test, and reliability is very key in underlying all of these activities within NextFlex and for this type of application. We already know that devices that are used for medical undergo all kinds of tests. Devices used, my background is IBM, and I was in charge of organic materials there. And we were expected to pass reliability tests that ceramics passed. And so I had quite a early career experience dealing with, taking plastic materials and expecting them to behave like a ceramic. And of course, there's clear limitations there. But by careful study of the surfaces and interfaces of every piece of filler, if in fact the material is filled, and/or the water uptake properties and the diffusion rates and the temperature susceptibilities are all key pieces of information to understand how to make something more robust. And so, in the work we did at IBM, we were able to get organic materials to pass ceramic type testing, including high temperatures, and all that stuff. And that was further demonstrated and very handy to do because it helped to pass lead-free solder conditions. And so much of that learning is embedded in these types of activities. Nevertheless, many of the devices we are talking about in this talk have shorter use times. And granted, they may be handled in a more abusive way with unpeeling and peeling and pasting on and removing, and it's really the shear of actually ripping something off that's the most damaging. Hence, we saw how Biostamp had an innovative approach to make their interconnects robust to that by reinforcing them. So I think what we're going to see is lots of test methods being developed, standards starting to emerge, expectations for certain material properties coming out. There's nothing worse than doing a peel test on a on a printed conductor. I didn't show that in my chart. I have a picture of it. As you see, there was the page numbers are fairly high count here. When you peel a printed trace, you crack it for sure. In fact, that's the only time we saw cracks. And so if you know that that's the worst case criteria, and you can design your system and your interfaces to be robust and compliant to avoid that, these mild cyclic strains that we were performing are more consistent with probably what the device would see when it was being worn. And as we noticed, we do see drifts in resistance, but they're still within ohms, and that's still within a design point. And so, we're optimistic that this is still very much within reach. And I think we're starting to see more and more of these applications emerge, but hopefully through the work that we've done and the work that others have done at NextFlex, and of course, all the great work that you do, all the great work that's done in Europe and in Asia, is really moving the field in this direction. And I think we're going to see a lot of good outcomes based on a lot of good research that's been performed to understand these surfaces and interfaces in this, as I like to call, the interface between the hard and the soft is really what we're studying here. And so I don't think I answered your question completely, but I think I gave you some thoughts that, we're working on it. A lot of people are, and I think there are ways to mediate the key problems.
It's being in a similar field, I understand, and then I think it's open-ended still.
Right, it's still open-ended. Always.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your wonderful input.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir,
any other questions? Yes, please.
Yes, sir. So this is Dr. Keyur Joshi. Sir, first of all, I was amazed by the range of topics that you covered and rigor that you are putting in. And not only research-wise it is interesting, but you are actually making difference to the society. Great work. My question is actually regarding your sweat rate sensor. So you mentioned that the resistor absorbs the sweat and dissolves. So is it recoverable, or exactly what happens there?
Right. So the whole point is as the perspiration is moving in, the resistors become solubilized by the material, and what we see is an overall drift. When we measure so what we have is these resistors that we print are tie resistors between two, curvilinear electrodes. And so it's like train tracks following, this path of how the moisture is being taken through to be, in this compact footprint. And so as they resolve, the resistance starts to change between these two tie lines. And that's what we use to monitor the actual evolution. The more and more perspiration dissolves it, the more the resistance changes. And of course, this is a once only thing. Once it's dissolved, it's gone. So it's not recoverable in terms of reusing it. It's a one-time use only.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So is there some technology that can make it recoverable, not one-time use? Is there some technology that you might be working on regarding this?
At this point, no, because these are, after they've been worn for a few hours, they're pretty grimy looking. So I think this was a case that, our scope was focused on the design point for the application, which was a one-time use. I think, there are other approaches that have been used that, and of course, many of them focused on the ionic and or other chemical detections. The reason for these tie resistors was specifically to measure sweat rate. And so, I suppose there would be other approaches, but I can't think of one at the moment, how you would do this in such a compact way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answers.
Professor Mark,
Yes, sir.
I'm Raghuram from Mechanical VAT Vellore. I just wanted to ask you regarding that sweat monitoring you said. Normally, sweat monitoring, the temperature also changes in the human body. But why is it that you're going in for such close sweat monitoring for dehydration? Even temperature change can monitor it's an indirect measure of sweat, isn't it, dehydration? Because sweat glands are the heat transfer agents.
Sure.
So why is it you're going for close monitoring of the sweat glands instead of temperature change? What's the reason? I'd like to know.
Specifically the ion content. We wanted to, the initial idea or the initial was to measure sodium and potassium ions. And that really tells you, are your ionics balanced? Do you need to drink Gatorade? And so we know when we're sick and dehydrated, that even for us to drink Pedialyte is a good solution because we need those ions. And that really what causes the delirium and the excessive fatigue. It's not only the loss of moisture, it's not having the correct ionic composition. So the device was designed to measure the ionics, and then we added the sweat rate feature as a secondary. And of course, with the systems I've shown, we have a variety of ways to measure temperature. Core body temperature is still measured in an inconvenient way. We won't describe the best way that happens, but subjects who were wearing these devices at the Corey Stringer Institute were subject to a substantial set of physiological evaluations, blood work, core body temperature, all kinds of things. And literally some of them had to exercise already being dehydrated. I can give a scenario that, as you can imagine, pilots in the Air Force, and this is why this started with them and why they initially funded it, when they go on their flying missions, tend to dehydrate themselves for good reasons, as we can expect. There's no breaks when you're in the air, and as a result, the combination of dehydration and fatigue and stress and altitude has caused pilots to black out. And so this was one of the many factors in total health and performance assessment. So think of the ultimate of having a suit that you could wear that has all these things in it. So wherever you go, appropriate for the application, you're being properly monitored.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from our colleagues at BIT or at Binghamton University? I'm going to paste my contact information in the chat box if anybody has any questions. And as you can see on the slide, also Dr. Poliks has his contact information, his email address and phone number. If there are any follow-up questions about Dr. Poliks' seminar, please feel free to reach out to him directly. If there are any questions about the webinar series, you're welcome to reach out to me directly as well. And of course, our co-organizer, Dr. Adin Vasudevan from VIT Mechanical Engineering. We would be glad to assist you with any questions you may have. And as it was mentioned earlier, we will be sending a recorded copy of this presentation. So you will also have access to all the slides and all the material that Dr. Poliks mentioned. If you're interested in any of the publications, we would be glad to share these with you as well. And if there are any other questions, I'd like to just make one final announcement about the next seminar. Any last questions for Dr. Poliks? Okay, thank you again very much, Dr. Poliks, for this wonderful presentation to kick off this joint webinar series. We definitely appreciate your time and look forward to further participations. At this point, I'd like to let you know that our next seminar is scheduled for next week with Professor Krishnan from VIT. and he will talk about a new novel approach to evaluate static and fatigue reliability of dual and quad IC packages. This presentation will be scheduled for next Thursday at 8:30 a.m. US Eastern Standard Time and 6 p.m. India Standard Time. We will be following up with Dean Vasudevan with a link and the meeting ID number. And we'd like to invite you to join the next seminar to listen to this new approach from Professor Krishnan. Professor Krishnan, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to attending your seminar next week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. It puts a lot of onus on me to carry the flag forward after listening to a stalwart like an eminent person like Dr. Mark. And thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity. We look forward to a lot of collaboration with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Dean Vasudevan, would you like to say any concluding remarks as well?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Poliks. It was really an excellent talk, and I think our faculty member will be interacting with you later, and it will be definitely be very useful for us for the further collaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Vasudevan. I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody for participating in this seminar, and hope you will get to join us in future seminars as well. I'd like to wish our colleagues at VIT a very wonderful evening, and my colleagues here in Binghamton a nice rest of your day. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.